COVID-19 is the name given to one of a long series of coronaviruses. This one primarily attacks the respiratory system, frequently causing pneumonia and potentially resulting in death. For those familiar with the Holy Bible, widespread pandemics have raised questions. Is this virus a fulfillment of prophecy concerning the end times? Are the hands of God about to unleash worldwide tribulation upon the earth?
It is not forbidden to look upon the breath of pestilence, then see, for it is here.
Do not look, Eleazar. Close the door, Joshua, and let death pass.
The word virus does not appear in the Bible, but God has used the generic terms pestilence and plague. In Exodus, we read how the Lord sent a final plague, killing the firstborn of Egypt, so that the Hebrews could be released from captivity.
They did not know where they were going, and they cared no more than the flocks and herds they drove. And there went forth among them planters of vineyards and sowers of seeds, each hoping to sit under his own vine and fig tree.
The Jewish festival of Passover is celebrated every year as a memorial of this deliverance.
Death of the firstborn.
God later used pestilence against the Israelites when they complained and rebelled. He did the same against the Philistines, so that the nations might know the almighty power of God. But those are Old Testament events. What about our present time? Would God today use a viral pandemic as an instrument of judgment? The most frightening, as yet unfulfilled prophecies of the Bible are found in the Revelation according to St. John, the last book in the New Testament canon. There, we are introduced to the coming tribulation apocalypse through 4 dreaded horsemen. In Revelation chapter 6, immediately after Jesus Christ receives the deed to the earth, he opens the first of 7 seals on the scroll.
And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer.
Those on earth who refuse to accept Christ as king will reap what they sow. A ruler who looks good, but brings tyranny by force. This conqueror leads the way for 3 bearers of destruction.
I heard the second living creature say, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that men should slay one another. And he was given a great sword.
In the past century, wars have gone global. They have cost millions of lives. And the weapons of war are now more horrifying than ever. What will a third world war bring?
When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine."
The scales and the high price for wheat and barley denote that this is famine, an approximate day's wage for a loaf of bread. Wars destroy crops. In times of global conflicts, trade and commerce suffer. Countries worldwide depend on the food staples provided through trade. When food is scarce, prices rise.
And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beast of the earth.
The fourth rider is Death. His weapons are not only war and famine, but also pestilence. They can each be terrible and appear on their own, but they also interact. Pestilence, viral diseases, follow on the heels of famine. Food scarcity on the heels of war and imposed quarantines. And most frightening is that all of these will continue at the same time, overlapping, adding tragedy upon tragedy, adding power to the conqueror, who is the Antichrist. Perhaps we can better understand the COVID-19 connection to prophecy if we examine the characteristics of the Antichrist, not only the man of lawlessness foretold in the Scriptures, but also his many precursors. For the Bible warns us, "Dear children, this is the last hour. And as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come." They were present in the first century, and some are among us today. Our human history is marred by the presence of egomaniacs and tyrants who bear in their nature what the Apostle John called the spirit of Antichrist. What do these people have in common? The characteristics to look for include the lust of the eyes, a love of the world system and the things the world has to offer, the lusts of the flesh, a preoccupation with physical and sexual pleasures, and the sinful pride of life, a conceited overestimation of oneself, the belief that one is more worthy and deserves power and prestige more than others. Taken to their extreme, people become mere tools of the tyrant. They are either useful submissive subjects or they are worthless annoyances to be controlled or erased. And finally, as the name Antichrist indicates, they not only oppose Christ, they desire to be worshipped as a substitute. One of the most startling prophecies in the Bible concerns the future rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, and how the Antichrist will desecrate it by putting up an idol to himself. Jesus told his disciples that this would be a sign of the end. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. We have seen tyrants gain control over people of their own country. But how can the entire world be controlled? How can the people from different countries and cultures surrender themselves to the will of an arrogant narcissist? Perhaps the answer can be tied to a global pandemic, a war with an invisible enemy.
No matter where in the world you are, the language of COVID-19 is the same. It's the language of
war. In a true sense, we're at war.
War against COVID-19.
We are fighting a bit of a battle, even a war.
We're all in a war against COVID-19 together.
I want to assure the American people that we're doing everything we can each day to confront and ultimately defeat this horrible, invisible enemy. We're at war. In a true sense, we're at war. And we're fighting an invisible enemy.
Fear has always been the ally of tyrants. And what better ally than an invisible, unstoppable enemy?
But even as we grasp at victory, there is a cancer, an evil tumor, growing, spreading in our midst.
Fear causes otherwise reasoning people to make foolish decisions, to surrender freedom for security, or to submit to dictates that will result in greater harm over the long term. If we have learned anything from history, let it be this: that surrender of freedom does not bring security. It brings bondage and destruction.
You reduced me to this.
No, Winston. You reduced yourself to it.
When will you shoot me?
It might take a long time. But don't give up hope. Everyone is cured sooner or later.
Consider the consequences of the prolonged COVID-19 lockdown imposed upon the people of the world. Its expressed intention was to flatten the curve of infections. That was done, yet the lockdowns continued in many countries. Job losses, personal conflicts, medical needs left untreated have led to increased deaths by murder, treatable diseases, and suicides. The founders of the United States of America warned us to say no to slavery. Benjamin Franklin said, "They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." George Washington expressed the danger of complacency. The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Likewise, Abraham Lincoln affirmed our solemn responsibility. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. In other words, personal liberty is to be guarded at all costs. We must guard against destroying ourselves by self-inflicted wounds. This is reasonable, yet pent-up frustrations, festering abuses, depression, and boredom only require a spark, a catalyst, to start a blazing fire.
As Saturday night anarchy reigns through America.
Everything becomes relative in the face of hatred. The desire for justice is replaced with the desire for revenge. The enemies of freedom know this full well. Those motivated by the spirit of Antichrist utilize disasters and violence to their benefit to gain control and eliminate resistance, fueling hate.
The situation in Minneapolis is no longer in any way about the murder of George Floyd. It is about attacking civil society, instilling fear, and disrupting our great cities.
Philosopher G.W.F. Hegel influenced Karl Marx's book, The Communist Manifesto, when he wrote, "World historical actions culminate with individuals as subjects, living instruments of the world mind." This philosophy energizes tyrants. It defines a clear goal, subjugation, and a clear path, anarchy. Karl Marx espoused violent overthrow as the way to utopian communism. There is only one way in which the murderous death agonies of the old society and the bloody birth throes of the new society can be shortened, simplified, and concentrated. And that way is revolutionary terror. This ideology has in our modern time been furthered by others, including Saul Alinsky, whose book Rules for Radicals has become the manual for the extreme political left. It was he who coined the phrase, "Never let a crisis go to waste." Liberal progressives, socialists, and radicals have used the phrase ever since.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
You don't need to hear another list of statistics to know that our economy is in crisis. If we drag our feet and fail to act, this crisis could turn into a catastrophe.
This would be a terrible crisis to waste, as the old saying goes.
Go home, Jacob! Go home! Go home, Jacob! Go home!
When fear is compounded by chaos, people become desperate for anyone who can restore order, at any cost.
He shall propose that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor.
The power you give me, I will lay down when this crisis has abated. And as my first act with this new authority, I will create a grand army of the Republic to counter the increasing threats of the separatists.
Fear, hatred, and violence are stepping stones that may lead to the acceptance of a world ruler who offers a false and temporary form of prosperity, peace, and safety. Clearly, the Antichrist will prove himself through strong, decisive actions to quell unrest. But his price will ultimately be bondage. How will the biblical Antichrist obtain and maintain control over the world economies? Revelation 13, verses 15 through 18 prophesies,
"The beast causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name." This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
He bears a birthmark, a sequence of sixes.
Supernatural and horror films have taken the number 666 literally as an identifier of the Antichrist and his followers. But the mark of the beast will do far more than indicate the member of a group. It will control all aspects of the world's economy. How is this possible? One effect of globalism is that an economic virus can spread as rapidly as a viral pandemic. The Thailand financial crisis of 1997 soon caused an international chain reaction throughout Asia and threatened to cause a worldwide meltdown. The U.S. banking crisis of 2007 soon resulted in a recession and global financial woes as banks closed, leading to a European debt crisis where countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Cyprus could no longer pay their government debts and had to be bailed out by other institutions. But none of these instances had the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown, a crisis that will continue to transform the world's financial system.
Empty streets have become the new normal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands laid off or furloughed, stores shut down, public gatherings banned, travel restrictions and physical distancing imposed, as a third of the world practices some form of a lockdown to slow down the spread of COVID-19. And all of this is having an impact on our global economy.
For many years, there has been a concerted effort to do away with cash. The stated problem with paper currency is that it can be counterfeited.
Something you may not think about, but federal agents say counterfeit money is easier to obtain and harder to detect than ever before.
Fake bills have gotten so good it's difficult for the experts even to determine what is and isn't genuine, real currency.
This is a problem, but it is not the primary reason why there is so much effort to replace physical money with digital. Cash is fungible. It can be used with anonymity. Pay for something in cash and no one needs to know. Digital spending, however, requires full disclosure that can be traced. Already, systems are in place to identify our purchases and spending habits, but most of these are voluntary on our part. Credit and debit purchases create a profile on us. Not only what we purchase, but when and where and sometimes why. Yet, these systems can be circumvented if we pay cash without worrying about discounts. But what if there were no cash? What if we didn't even need a membership or credit card to make a purchase? This would suddenly put complete control of our finances into the hands of a centralized system. And nowhere is this taking place more rapidly than in Sweden.
In Sweden, the microchips are already here.
The microchip implants use the same technology that's in contactless credit cards,
which have made cash pretty much obsolete in Sweden.
No cash.
At this tech fair, a chipping event for those on the cutting edge, merging their hands with this new technology.
Barcodes and QR codes reveal plenty of information. But an RFID or NFC chip the size of a grain of rice implanted under the skin can store and relay a huge amount of data. This data can start engines, open or lock doors, serve as identification, and even allow financial transactions.
On Sweden's high-speed rail lines for the past 18 months, implanted passengers have put their travel payment on the chip.
I think it's really good with a chip ticket. I love all companies that use the chip technology.
The prophecy that no one would be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast could not be fulfilled in the history of the world. Only now, with the rapid increase in technology, is this possible.
Even a car door can be tweaked to open with a touch, but each touch leaves a digital footprint, and that can compromise privacy.
Personal privacy is rapidly becoming a thing of the past. GPS satellites keep track of our location while other spy satellites and unmanned aerial drones keep eyes on us from above. Land-based surveillance systems with cameras and facial recognition software are often watching. Everything we say over our phones, computers, and in our homes is potentially recorded, even when our devices are turned off. the prophet Daniel could not have fully understood what he was shown regarding the last days. Thus he was instructed, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." Today we can barely keep up with the world's fast pace and advances in technology. A one-world economy facilitated by implanted chips is very practical. All it requires is full participation. In keeping with the never let a crisis go to waste philosophy, the COVID-19 pandemic has become the most widespread and complex social experiment in history. The pandemic has allowed governments and government officials around the world to create their own emergency rules, pick and choose businesses to close, quarantine healthy people in their homes, and tell free citizens what they can and cannot do.
It is like the wild, wild west in the surfing world. Beaches across the globe are closing down, surfers are being arrested, chased up and down the beaches, and fined for thousands of dollars.
Members of the public are reminded to keep a safe distance of 6 feet from others.
Under the guise of public safety and the threat of fines and arrest, they cite speculations as proven science and demand obedience.
Many of the guidelines for protecting yourself against COVID-19 focus on cleaning hard surfaces and high-touch surfaces, like your smartphone.
The CDC now says the coronavirus does not easily spread by touching surfaces.
Surgical masks aren't recommended for the general public. They should only be worn by medical professionals or people who are caring for an infected person.
The U.S. Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, said masks on the general population not only wouldn't help, but might hurt.
Wearing a mask improperly can actually increase your risk of getting disease. It can also give you a false sense of security.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
My recommendation has always been that one has to be really careful to avoid crowded places. And if you do it, which I don't recommend you do, but if you do, you make sure you wear a mask and keep a mask on all the time.
This afternoon, Governor Gavin Newsom mandated that masks be worn just about every place in California.
And residents who don't comply could face a hefty fine.
And the fine for violating the order is $1,000 per day per violation.
What a tremendous opportunity. When the experiment is ended, the evidence will answer some significant questions, such as, to what extent can we control people? What can we get away with? How far can we push?
It's a lovely city.
It's amazing what people can accomplish when their survival's at stake. Squeeze them hard enough, there's nothing they can't do. No line they won't cross.
Amidst the vast economic damage done by COVID-19, the massive increase in unemployment, there is one bright spot. The hottest job opportunity has become that of contact tracer.
Public health officials are looking for ordinary people from any neighborhood to help track COVID-19 cases.
We should also hire contact tracers in mass.
This public health brigade monitors the epidemic in one of the biggest neighborhoods of Berlin.
10,000 in phase one, 20,000 within 2 months.
Governor Newsom says he is expecting 20,000 people will be hired as contact tracers in the state in the next couple of months.
How do you fight a war with an invisible enemy? You hire an army of people to track down potential carriers of the disease. Contact tracing is nothing new. It has been used effectively for identifying victims of other contagious disease outbreaks. It is also now being used in police investigations and by government intelligence agencies throughout the world to identify the hierarchy of leadership in criminal and terrorist organizations. These are valuable and legitimate purposes, but the information gathered can also be misused. Our friends and neighbors are encouraged to report violations of the COVID-19 rules set in place. We are told that non-compliance is a threat to life, that tattling on our neighbor is a civic duty. Totalitarian governments are notorious for using community collaborators to spy on their family and neighbors, to identify enemies of the state. Today, the same turning people against people is prevalent in oppressive governments. But perhaps the most nefarious use of information gathering for a dark purpose can be seen in a map viewable at the Amsterdam Holocaust Museum. The Department of Statistics for the Municipality of Amsterdam, under orders from their Nazi occupiers in 1941, compiled this map. Every dot on the map represented 10 Jews in their location. Contact tracing became a very effective tool. Some 80% of the Amsterdam Jews were gathered for shipment to death camps and killed, including young Anne Frank, whose diary was found after she and her family were removed from their hiding place. Yet surely contact tracing could never be used for such a purpose again, especially in free democratic countries. Simon Wiesenthal, who survived the concentration camps and made it his life's mission to capture Nazi war criminals, was once asked if there could be another Holocaust. He replied, "The combination of hatred and technology is the greatest danger threatening mankind. Now, more than at any other time in history, information and technology have stolen our privacy and placed our freedom, our very lives, in jeopardy." Consider how full participation may be achieved. We have seen how convenience is a driving force for implanted technology. This is not only happening in Sweden, but also throughout Europe, the United States, and the rest of the world.
They're already used to identify ranch animals and pets, but the practice of implanting chips in people is also on the rise.
The promise of making everything easier is especially attractive to the younger generations, who have been trained to love and even depend upon technology to the point of addiction.
In the future, do you think everyone is going to be chipped?
I think it'll be voluntary, but I am certainly convinced that millions of people will find it very, very valuable to have a smart device under their skin.
The problem arises when individual choice is diminished or absent, or when those who love freedom and privacy more than convenience are pushed to comply.
Currently, it's by choice. No one is enforcing you have to be microchipped. If that happens, completely different ball game and lots more arguments to be had around it.
Compliance is not imposed immediately upon everyone. It starts with smaller people groups having limited or no ability to resist. The general population is then told that application is in their personal or the public good.
The suggestion from State Senator Kathy Michonne to microchip people convicted of serious crimes with tiny GPS devices under their skin is picking up steam.
But what if you had an extra layer of security inside your child?
If it'll save my kid, there's no step that's too extreme.
The technology is here, but just how far would you go to keep your kids safe?
Well, a company is developing a microchip that could be used to help patients with dementia. They say they've gotten requests from people with relatives who have Alzheimer's or dementia. The new device will have GPS technology.
The punishment or subjugation of other people is always painted as an absolute necessity in the most appealing light for the most altruistic reasons. And it must be done immediately because, after all, it is a crisis. For everyone else, compliance may be enforced slowly, as the heat is turned up, but there will be consequences if we resist. Consider what we are experiencing today. You must sign away your privacy to buy a smartphone or use an app. Because of COVID-19, you may need to have a tracking app on your phone or government health approvals to travel.
We must be able to trace every infection chain. We are working on an app that can help us do that.
A tracing app in Singapore, for example, centrally collects the names and ages of its users. The large Chinese telecommunications companies granted authorities access to their databases at the beginning of February, allowing them to track individuals' movements.
The government wants its eyes everywhere.
We need to lift that to an industrial capability.
Already governments are keen to capture your fingerprints. They are keen to capture your iris scans, and they want to be able to do this at a distance so they can identify as you walk through areas. They're doing facial recognition. These are all fallible technologies. They're hard to do well, but the idea that they could actually just embed you, it is the modern form of tattooing barcodes on people, and we've seen governments do that in the past. This is just the next generation.
And eventually, the final, inevitable stage arrives. Compulsion.
Somebody put an implant inside me. I found it this morning.
Back in 2004, the Manchurian Candidate suggested a future where humans are chipped and controlled. We have been warned.
The day will come when people will no longer be given an option but to receive the mark of the beast. Comply or die. Let us not be caught unaware. It is not a giant leap to go from convenience to compliance to compulsion. It is a repeated pattern, and we have already traveled a long way down that road. Jesus was asked by his disciples to tell them the signs of the end of the age. In part, Jesus replied, "For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold." Does this not describe our day? Yet we are told that this is just the beginning of the end. These signs are equated to birth pains, which intensify and grow more frequent, overlapping until the final excruciating moment. Could it be that COVID-19 signals the approaching end? If that were the case, then like that of childbirth, we would expect to see an increase in the frequency of pandemic diseases. What have we seen in the past century? The pattern would indicate that the fulfillment of Bible prophecy is drawing closer, but we cannot say that COVID-19 is the final pandemic. If anything, there is a frightening likelihood that far more intense and deadly pestilences are just beyond the horizon, and may even overlap what we are now experiencing.
A new strain of the swine flu has been found in pigs in China, making matters worse in this COVID-19 pandemic. It has the potential to cross over to humans and become yet another devastating pandemic.
Scientists in Italy are investigating the appearance of pink glacial ice in the Alps, caused by algae and associated with climate change.
It sounds biblical, but as the world grapples with the COVID pandemic, the continent of Africa is facing another plague locusts. The small insects pose a serious threat to food security throughout the region.
In the media, we hear many references to the new normal.
If you're looking for a window on the new normal, it may very well be made of plexiglass.
Laying out goals and the new normal ahead.
We get to a new normal.
Wait. And what new normal is that?
Those words indicate the belief that we will never return to the quality of life we had before COVID-19.
We're never going to be the same again. The fear that we have, the anxiety that we have, that's not just going to go away. I don't think we get back to normal.
Unfortunately, this may well be true. From now on, a certain degree of fear will be attached to gatherings and the simplest of social conventions. But we must not give in to despair. There is always hope if we think and act wisely. We must not surrender our freedom to satisfy the hidden agendas of hypocritical demagogues, nor should we let fear dictate our actions. On the other hand, the coronavirus should not be taken lightly. We must be responsible and considerate. If we care for other people, we will think of their interest along with our own. We will wear a mask or keep a safe social distance when possible, especially around those who are most susceptible to the virus. Sensible precautions, done voluntarily for the sake of others, are the most loving expression of free will. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. The world is struggling against COVID-19. Laboratories everywhere are working at top capacity to find a vaccine, and it may be that one will eventually be developed. But if God is really beginning to pour out His wrath, none of our efforts will bring safety. Like wave following wave at the seashore, so will we see God's wrath poured upon the earth with increasing intensity until we recognize our weakness and God's sovereignty. We have seen the rapid changes affecting our society, the violence, the moral depravity, the fear. We have discussed the COVID-19 pandemic and how it, along with wars and famines and deadly plagues, will facilitate the rise of a political leader holding complete control over the world's economy and people. We have read prophetic scriptures that indicate where we are heading, the plagues to come. Yet, none of the present or foreseeable disasters can compare to the festering disease that has already spread to every person on earth. A disease that resides in the heart and mind of every human being. A pandemic of what the Bible calls sin. The Bible tells us that because of the original rebellion of Adam and Eve, sin, missing the mark of God's standard, has been passed down to all mankind. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And we are told that the wages of sin is death, not only physical death, but also eternal separation from the holy God who created us. The worst kind of tyranny is not that imposed by unjust rulers upon people. It is the spiritual tyranny of sin that separates us from God and dominates every aspect of our existence, making us slaves and leading to eternal condemnation.
Look down, you'll always be a slave. Look down, you're standing in your grave.
God alone has provided the cure to our spiritual state. He did so by sending His one and only Son to suffer and die for our sins, paying the penalty, the price for restoration that we could never pay, no matter what we do, no matter how good we try to be. The only way to salvation is by faith in God's perfect sacrifice. Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ, His Son." Physical sickness and death are always with us, but spiritual life is everlasting for those who believe. Nothing diminishes fear more completely than deliverance from the bondage of sin, and the knowledge that our eternal destiny has been secured by the love of Almighty God.